Okay, so we talked about kind of the changes happening in society after World War I and our fear of communism and, the growth of advertising and movies and radio and music and literature and how that had such a huge impact on our culture. And we talk about, the increase in spending and whatnot, and then the stock market crashes and everything's just kind of a mess. But when we talk about the Great Depression, you can't talk about the Great Depression without talking about the Dust Bowl. Okay, so Standard 17b asks you to explain the factors, those things that led to the Dust Bowl occurring, and what was the resulting movement and the migration west. Like, what is it that caused all of this to happen? So let's okay, so this is one of your terms. What was it? So we're talking about the Midwest of the United States. All right, so we're not talking about the West Coast and California and New Mexico and all that. And we're not talking about the South with Texas and Florida and Alabama and all that, or the East Coast where you got New York down to Virginia and North Carolina and Georgia and all that. We're talking about the middle of the United States where we do all our farming. Okay, what we call the breadbasket of the U.S., where all the wheat is grown and whatnot. So the Dust Bowl is an area of land, the stuff that grows, has been lost, and the soil is reduced to dust, and it's been eroded. You've taken science. You know what those terms mean, okay? Especially because of drought or unsuitable farming practice. If you've ever noticed a hillside, when it rains a lot, if there's not a lot of plants growing or trees growing on that hillside, it's mud and it slides down, okay? You see a lot of that on the West Coast in Malibu, in California, where they have no vegetation on those hillsides, and all those rains, get a ton of rain, those hills just slide because there's no vegetation on it, okay? The Dust Bowl was a symbol of overproduction and contributed to the economic crisis of the 1930s. It showed that we were just producing way too much stuff and we really weren't being very careful. Farmers were given a lot of land. Prior to the Dust Bowl, a lot of farmers moved to the Midwest because they were given a lot of land due to the Homestead Act. I think that's somewhere in your note-taking sheet. So they all went to the Midwest to farm. I mean, if you're a farmer and you're given a lot of land, like, you're going to go find good land to farm. So in the Midwest, it goes through it has its wet and dry cycles. And when the farmers in the late 1920s, when the farmers moved to the Midwest, it was during a wet season. So the soil had a lot of nutrients, a lot of things could grow there. Nobody was really expecting the dry season. Okay, so why did, all of the land in the Midwest just kind of go away? Okay, here are a lot of the reasons, things that led up to the Dust Bowl. And I'm going to show you some pictures so that you can see really why it was called the Dust Bowl. It's literal. So farmers went to the Midwest during the wet season. So things were growing there. So they thought, hey, my farm's going to grow. Everything's good. I'm sorry that there are spelling mistakes. I guess I just typed too fast and I missed some words. But farmers planted thousands of acres of crops because there was a huge demand for grain all over the United States. Farmers weren't thinking that you have to give the land rest. You have to let the soil rest. That's why you plant a little, you grow it, you harvest it, and then you plant over here and you let that field rest for a year or so. Year after year, farmers farmed without giving the soil any rest. And the more deep plowing they did, it killed off all of this prairie grass, which held together that top layer of soil. That top layer of soil is what keeps everything down. It keeps it stay in one spot. Well, in the Midwest, they have a lot of winds. You know about tornadoes. Okay, the winds picked up. And all that topsoil, there was nothing to hold it down. There was no prairie grass anymore. So all that blew away. And the dust storms and the drought lasted for 10 years. Well, at that point, you can't grow anything. So the farms fail. They go under and families have no food and no way to take care of themselves. So they're going to leave. They're going to move. They're going to migrate. This is a picture of the Dust Bowl. Winds blew up there's no grass. So it's all just dust. And all those winds blow all that dust up in the air. And you can't see. And it's scary. If you've ever been near a tornado, I mean, that's pretty scary stuff. Okay. That should bring to mind things like, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, right? All right. So all these people in the Midwest, and we're talking from Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, and whatnot, they're known as Okies. Well, 2/3 of the population in the Midwest are going to leave because their farms fail. They have no way to feed their families. Well, if you're going to move to where the jobs and the money are. Without any money, they become migrant workers, which means you move from one farm to the next based on the season. So during the springtime into the summer, on the West Coast in California, we have there's a lot of migrant workers because those are the harvest seasons, the growing seasons. There's a lot of workers, a lot of people that come and they work the farms. And then when that growing season's over, they leave and they go to another part of the country and they work the farms. They migrate, they move from farm to farm to follow the growing seasons because that's where the money is and the jobs are. Okay. These migrant workers are going to be known as Okies. Oklahoma, right? That's a term you know in your vocab terms. Well, their plight, their misery is turned into a story. And John Steinbeck writes a very well-known novel called The Grapes of Wrath. And it's about the Dust Bowl and it's about the Great Depression. And you really get insight into what life was like and the lack of money and food and the toll it took on the families. Okay, so if you ever get a chance to read it, like I'm telling you, it's a good book.